All right. Okay, so let's take a look at many-to-many, how to implement a web application that can manipulate and interact with a set of tables that implement a many-to-many relationship. So let's create a couple of tables here. One of them will be the engineer that might be assigned to various jobs, right? And then we'll implement the job that might have several engineers associated or assigned to that particular job. So let's create an engineer table with identity and name for as varchar. And then we'll create another table under here called job. That is also identity. It has also a name for the job. And finally, what we'll do is that we'll use a separate table to capture the fact that these two might be related to one another, right? That an engineer is assigned to a particular job, and that a job might have several engineers assigned to it, right? So we'll add a table here that says that engineer assigned. Okay, so job assignment or job assignment. Okay, and what this will have is two foreign keys, right? One that goes out to the engineer, and one that goes out to the job, right? So we'll call this the we won't use an ID or identity for the primary key. Instead, what we'll do is that we'll enforce the fact that an engineer should not be assigned to the same job more than once, right? So the combination user and job, right, should be unique. Right? If an engineer is assigned once, then we would not want to see that combination more than once, right? So first, we'll keep track of the engineer ID as not null foreign key that references engineer ID, and we'll have another foreign key that goes out to the job, right? Not null foreign key that references the job ID. And then what we want to do is enforce the fact that these are unique, right? That we're not going to allow a duplication of an engineer being assigned more than once to the same job. So we're going to say that the primary key will be the combination of the engineer ID with the job ID. Okay. All right, so we're going to update that. All right. Okay, so now let's create the entity framework. Let's use the entity framework to create the classes that will allow us to create these relationships. Actually, before we do that, let's create a couple of engineers. Can you see that? And let's make up names. So just E1, 2. Oh, we got 8 engineers. And let's create a couple of jobs. Oh, no. Look at the data. Let's say J1, J2, J3, J4, J5, J6, J7, J8. And finally, let's assign a couple of engineers to various jobs. I will say that engineer 1 is assigned to job 1. Engineer 1 is also assigned to job 2. 1 is assigned to 3. Engineer 2 is collaborating with engineer 1 in job number 3. But same engineer is working on their own on job number 4. Engineer 3 is also working with both engineers in job 3, but they're working on job number 5 on their own, and also on job number 6. Right, and finally 4 is collaborating with 3 on job number 6. Okay. Notice that out of the 8 engineers, only 4 are assigned, right? But they exist; they're there, right? And out of the 8 jobs, only 6 have been assigned, right? Resources, but the other 2 jobs, nobody's working on those. Okay. All right. So we got some data. Let's close all this. Let's now create the classes that will allow us to interact with these tables with the Entity Framework API. We'll go here and add an ADO.NET entity model, right? And we'll call it job resources model. .resource model. Okay, and we'll say add, and it's going to put in an app code, and we're going to use that database 5610, and we can change the name of the object we're going to use to enter the API. We're going to call it job entities. How's that? Job entities. Then we're going to choose the tables we want to interact with. We want to work with engineers. We want to work with jobs and job assignments. And we'll say finish. Okay, we'll see what it generates for us. It's okay. Okay, look what it generated for us. So it created for us this class diagram, right? That looks very similar to what we have there, right? The entity and the job, with the many-to-many going from both sides, right? So obviously this is a conceptual implementation, right? This is, just like a class diagram in UML, it's a concept, right? It's the way we want to think about these entities and what the relationship means, right? The actual implementation underneath is 3 tables, right? The third table, though, is there only because of the limitation of not being able to represent collections of foreign keys, right, on either entity. But that is not the case in an object model. In an object model, we can represent collections, right, of things, arrays and whatnot, right? Instead, in the way we represent that in the relational model is to have actual records, right, in tables. Okay, so what our object model does to be able to implement that relationship, what it does is that it creates additional properties. Notice that we have the properties that are natively there, right, the IDs and the names that were already there, but it adds other properties such as jobs to be able to retrieve the jobs that are associated to an engineer. So from the point of view of the engineer, I can look at all the jobs that that instance of engineer is associated with. Or from the point of view of the job, notice that we have a collection of engineers, right? We can look at all the engineers that are associated to a particular job, right? If we look at the code that generates for us, there it is, job resource model. Okay, in here, these are the classes, right? These are the classes that if we query the database, it'll give us these instances, right? If we look for engineer number 1, remember engineer number 1 was associated to the first 3 jobs, remember that, right? So if we query for engineer number 1, not only will we get the IDs and the names and all the properties that are specific to this particular instance, this particular entity, but we will also have populated the collection of jobs to which this engineer is associated with, right? Which is what? It's the joining, right? It's joining these 3 tables, right? It's saying, go fetch all the jobs where the ID of the job matches the job ID, right, in the mapping table, and the ID of the engineer ID maps the engineer ID that you're asking me for. So it's joining all these 3 tables to populate this collection. We would have to do that by hand, right? If we weren't doing the if we weren't using the entity model, if we were using the the DAOs that we were writing last week, right? We would write all the query. We have to write all those joins, right? Populate those joins, do the query, iterate over the result set, extract all the various fields, instantiate not only the engineer, but instantiate not all the objects, right, that are associated to the engineer, create a collection, and populate this. Yes?
Didn't last week it come out with a list when you did this?
Yeah. Yes, that is what not last week, Wednesday. Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
This was on Wednesday we did this.
Yeah,
last week we did
You're right. Last class.
Last class we did do this, right? What's interesting here is that we had there's a one-to-many from the point of view of the engineer, right? But from the point of the job, we also have the one-to-many from the point of view of the job. We see all the engineers that are associated to the engineer, right? Okay, which is powerful, right? This collection does the mapping, does the joining of all these 3 tables and extracts it and instantiates all the objects, and it populates these collections. Very, very powerful. Okay. Anyway, so let's go on and create a couple of pages to play around with this. And so let's create here a directory. This is a many-to-many job resources. Job resource model. So in here, notice that we can start from either way, right? In last class, we started from the author, a list of authors, and then we drilled down, right, into the books and whatnot. In this case, we kind of could start for either way. We can start from the engineers and navigate towards the jobs, or we can start from the jobs and navigate to the engineers, right? There is no strict parent-child relationship, right? You could say perhaps that the jobs are the children of employees, right? But there's nothing strict here in the direction of the relationship. Okay, one might say that if I have the engineer, I want to know the jobs. I know that the jobs can be assigned to many engineers, right? But I might not be interested in navigating from the jobs back to the engineer. I might be only interested in navigating one way, right? Giving an engineer, I can go and fetch all the jobs that this engineer is associated with, right? Now, there could be many engineers associated to that one job, right? But I might not be interested in navigating from the jobs to the engineers. And so in that case, then it would be a strictly in one direction, right? Start from the engineers, then you have to navigate to the children of the jobs, right? Even though you still have the many-to-many, okay? Even though you have the many-to-many. Here we have both. We can navigate from the jobs to engineers to the jobs, right? So there's no clear parent-child relationship other than a logical way of thinking on who owns what, right? Other than engineers, just because they might be humans. Humans are very self-centered, okay? And we give ourselves too much importance. So yes, so the engineers are the owners. Well, no engineers, no jobs. Wait, no jobs, no engineers? I guess. All right, so let's create a couple of pages that will display one of these. So let's start with engineers. Arbitrarily, we'll start with the engineers. And this is somewhat the same that we play around with on Wednesday. Let's create here a list of engineers, engineer list. And we'll say that this is each one, engineer list. And in here, we might use UL on other lists to display all the engineers like we did on Wednesday. So something like ASP repeater ID, we'll call it engineer list. And this runs at server. And the item template will be an LI that displays the name of the engineer in the current iteration, right? So percent eval okay. Now we have to populate this collection, and we'll do that from the code behind. And in here we need to get a hold of the what do we call it? Job entities. There it is, right? That's the name we gave the class that allows us to enter the API, right? So here's the B, new job entities. Now that we have DB, we'll notice that in here we'll have the representation of the engineers and the jobs as if they were collections. We can treat them as such, right? So for instance, the if I want the engineers, that they are as if they were a collection, right? We can convert it to a list, and we can use that list to feed the repeater, right? And the repeater was it engineer list dot data source is equal to this list, and then engineer list dot data bind. So now if we run this, it'll do a query, a select all, right? Select star from an engineer table that will retrieve it, instantiate the objects, and retrieve the name. Hopefully, maybe. There they are, right? So we have the engineers. It's kind of ugly. If it's okay with you, I like to just make this a little bit prettier. Just at least by copying the bootstrap link. And maybe, giving here a container. No, wrong one. There we go. So it's a little prettier. And maybe use a table instead. And instead of a TLI, maybe use a table row, and maybe put this inside of a TD. I'm always using that to make it pretty. Thank you. All right, there it is. So it looks a little better, more presentable. And we can obviously create new ones. We can add a T head to instantiate new new engineers. So we could say put an input field here using ASP text boxes. Maybe we'll call it name text box. This is we'll run at the server, and we'll use class form control. We have the form control, and add, maybe right after that we'll add a button that will allow us to actually add one, right? So we have button ID create engineer, button, and we're going to run at the server. We're going to paint it with the button primary, and on click, the text will be create, and the on click, I'd like to send an event handler that it gets added here. To do this, we'll get a hold of the magical object that allows us to use this, right? So we're going to have to create a new engineer. Let's create a new engineer instance. New engineer, and populate their name from the text box, right? So what I call it, name text box, text, and then we can use DB to add to the engineer collection this new engineer E, and then save the changes, right? And then repopulate the data source with the list of engineers, right? All right, so let's refresh. Oops. Already had variable E. I'll use double E, electrical engineer. There we go. So we can create, so we have 8 engineers, so we can create a 9th engineer. There it is, it's being added, right? All right, so let's now navigate to a details page where we can list the jobs where this engineer is working at, right? Is working on. So let's add maybe a TD here with a button that allows us to navigate to the details, right? So this would be a href that goes to engineer details, ASPX, with the engineer ID taken from the evaluation of the ID field of the current instance that we're iterating over, right? So we'll close that and say details, and we'll paint the hyperlink as if it were a button. There we go. So we have we can add new ones. We can go navigate to details. So if we click on details, it'll want to navigate to a page that doesn't exist yet. But let's create it real quick. Notice that the engineer is up here in the parameter list, right? And let's create a new page here, a new web form called engineer details, and we'll copy the bootstrap link. Let's copy the bootstrap link and all the way to the div. So bootstrap it all the way down to the div. There we go. Okay, so it exists. And let's preprint this. And this will be H1 engineer details. Yep. Okay. And right now the only details that we have is what? The name of the name of the engineer, right? But if we had, you might have an email, phone number, right? URL of their website, whatever, right? It would be listed here, perhaps, right? So here might have ASP label. The ID would be maybe the name. Run at server. So maybe what we do is instead of putting the label here, instead of using H1, right? We'll use the name of the engineer as the title of the page, right? Details for this particular person, and then we can show all the projects that this engineer is working on, as a table. With And in the table, you might have a T body. And in the T body, then we're going to iterate over all the projects that they're working on, right? So we'll use a repeater, ID, all the job lists, right? List of jobs. And this runs at server. And we have an item template that is going to iterate and generate rows for each one of the jobs. And we'll display the name of the current job instance. Yes. Right. So what's left is populating this list, this job list, from the engineer, right, for the particular engineer ID that we are passing as an argument, right? So let's do that. Let's go to the details page and let's look at the code behind. We're going to retrieve the ID, right? So we'll say engineer. So this is a string, engineer ID from the request of the same name. And then the ID will be conversion to integer of the engineer ID into an integer, right? Once we have the ID, we can use the job entities to query the collection of engineers for that particular ID, right? And that's going to return to us an instance of engineer, right? It's not only going to have the attributes of engineers, which are the native attributes, are the ID of the engineer and the name of the engineer, right? Those are the native fields in the table. But we also have here the jobs as a collection. Look at that, right? It populates the jobs. It populates the jobs as a collection. Now you might say, well, what if I didn't want the jobs? What if I never wanted the jobs? I only was interested on the details of the engineer. There would have been a unnecessary query, right, for those jobs, unnecessary read of those, an iteration of them, an instantiation, right, and ultimately putting in RAM. I'm wasting time in CPU to load those lists of jobs, right, if I didn't need them, right? So what typically happens is that these will be only loaded on demand. Okay, by default, it uses what it's called lazy loading, right? If you don't need the jobs, if you never ask for jobs, I will not retrieve them. Only if you explicitly ask for jobs, like we're doing now, right? Will I go ahead and query for the jobs and do, you know, all the joins and the query and the iteration and the instantiation and the population of the list and give you the list. Okay. Otherwise, it would be very wasteful, you know, to retrieve everything. And what's called eager, right? That's the alternative. I could decide that yes, I always want the jobs, right? I don't want to wait not a single millisecond for you to decide whether I'm going to need them or not. Just fetch them, right? So it could be configured to use eager query, eager loading, as opposed to lazy loading. Anyway, so now I have the list, and so we can now populate the repeater job list, right, that we declare in the UI, right, and then bind the data so that it's rendered, right? So that what we have here is, oh, what happened? J1, J2, J3, really? How do we render it? Let me see. Engineer details, TR. Oh, this has to be inside of a TD. TD. And And we never populated the label, right? The name label, we never populated it. So let's populate it. Now that we have the engineer, we're going to populate the name label. Text will be the engineer's name. There it is. So we have the name of the engineer at the top, and then all the jobs down below, right? Now, one thing that we did when we were looking at one-to-many, right, when it was authors and books, right? What we did here is we added a form up here, right, for the books, right? Because these are the equivalent of books, right? You have the parent, author, and the child, the children books, right? Over here we have the parent engineer, and we have the children, right, jobs that the engineer is associated with. In that case, we had a form that allowed us to add books to that author, which makes sense, right? Because books only made sense inside of the context of an author, right? Over here, jobs do have a meaning outside of the relationship of an engineer, right? A job could exist independently of an engineer, okay? So even though we could add the job here, I think it would make more sense to go to like an overall list of the jobs, right? Where I independently create and delete jobs independently of any engineers, right? And then either navigate to a job and add resources to that job, other engineers, or I can navigate to an engineer, right, to a resource, and associate them to various tasks and jobs and whatnot. Okay, so let's do the second one. Let's do the association, right? We want to associate this employee with other jobs, right? So what we could do is, one way that we could do it is put a text box here, and you give me the ID of the project, right? And I click on add and a button or a sign, and then since I know the ID, I can look up the job, right? And then create the association. But who knows what the ID of the project is, or the job? It's kind of it's inconvenient having to know the ID of the job, right? So we might do it by name, right? I know the name of the job, and I can assign it by name. But again, so cumbersome. Maybe you mistyped it. Maybe you you didn't write it correctly. You don't exactly remember the name of the job. Maybe it has a very long name. You don't remember exactly what it is. So instead, what we'd like to be able to do is perhaps give them a drop down on here. Here are all the jobs, right? You choose which one, right? And then click on assign, right? So let's do that instead. Let's create a drop down of all the options, and then let you choose. So let's do that. Yes. What's it? You mean this? Yes. If you're using Bootstrap, right, it'll use the size of the outer container, right? And there's three sizes, right? There's the desktop size, the tablet size, and then the phone size, right? Notice that it changes, right? Notice that. See how it changes? Because I'm zooming, right? It's choosing. That's the desktop size. That's as big as it'll go. I'm zooming. It doesn't fit, so it goes to a smaller size. That's a tablet size. I'm zooming. Now it's too big. Doesn't fit. It goes down to the phone size. Right. So we did that. We played around with grids a while back. I don't remember. It was like 960 pixels. Yes, there's three sizes. Yes, I think the biggest is like 1,000 pixels wide or something like that. So it won't go bigger than 1,000. Yeah, with a container. When we say container, right? If we remove container, it will take up the entire size. But it'll just go all the way to the top, no matter how much you zoom in or zoom out. Right, it takes up to 100%. Okay. Sorry? think it's 960, right? But it's a number that is easily divisible by 12. Okay. All right. So what we want to do here is here in the table in the header, right, in the T head, we want to like have a drop down where we can choose the job that we want to assign this engineer to, right? So to do that, we're going to use another of ASPX's components. I mean, there's tons of components. We're going to use the drop down component or drop down list component, and here will be the job chooser, right? Drop down where we can choose the job, right? This is going to be run at server. Right, and we need to populate. We need to populate and say, well, what are all the jobs that that are in there, right? So to do that, we're going to go to the code behind and use, you know, on page load, right? On page load, we're going to use the DB object to get a hold of the collection of all the jobs, right? Notice that under DB we have jobs just as a collection of all the jobs, right? If we can convert it to a list, we could use that as a data source for the dropdown. We can say, hey, dropdown, get your lists from this collection of objects. It'll be a collection of what? Collection of instances of job. Yes? So we can say job chooser data source equal to that, and then data bind. Okay. So if we go back here and refresh, notice that there is a drop down, right? But notice that they're all instances of job. See that? Job. Those are instances of the that class that was generated for us by the entity framework. Okay, and obviously this is useless, right? So let's see if we can improve it. What we could do, right? We could do is configure, right? As it's iterating over the instances of the jobs, what field to use, right, for the display, right, in the dropdown. Right, we can say that the data text field, right, I want you to grab the text that you display in the dropdown. I want you to use the name. That's the field that I want you to use, right? Remember that each job instance has a field ID and has a field name. Yes, I'm telling it, for the text display for human purposes, use the name field. Okay, so let's do that. So there it is. So we have now the drop downs, the names of the fields. Let's make it a little prettier. Let's use a CSS class, also a form control. So it's nice and it fills up the entire thing. Right. So if we drop down, we have all the names. Now, but if you look at the code that the server is generating, we'll notice that. So it's using the text, the name, right, for the display, but it's also using the name for the value of the dropdown. You see that, right? But for purposes of the algorithm, for the software, they really care the ID, right? Because that's what I'm going to use to query the database by ID. I don't really care about the name, right? That's for human consumption, right? But for the algorithm's point of view, I would prefer IDs, right? If you're going to give me something, give me the ID so I can query the database and retrieve that particular job for that particular ID. Yes? Right. So let's change that in the in the code behind. We can say job chooser dot the data value field, right? Right. For the value of the dropdown, I want you to use instead the field called ID. Use the ID field, right, for the value, but use the name for the text. Okay, So now if we refresh this, we'll notice that for the value, it's using the IDs, right? But for the text, is using the name. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right, so what we need to do now is tell the server, says, hey, this is the job I want to assign. This is the job that I want to assign this engineer to, okay? So we kind of need, oh wait, this is the T hat, this should be in a T row, shouldn't it? And this should be in a TH, shouldn't it? Yeah, let's put it in here. There we go. Magic button. And then at the end, we're going to add a button that will allow us to invoke the action of actually assigning, right, this engineer to this particular job. Yes? So this will be ID assign button. And this runs at server. And the text will be assign. I'm going to paint it button primary, and on click, I'm going to create a new event handler. There we go. And the event handler is right here. What do I need to do? I need to get a hold of these two things, right? I need to get a hold of the engineer and say, hey, engineer, you are assigned to this job. And then I need to tell the job, hey, job, this engineer is assigned to you. Okay, I need to notify both ends, because remember, there's two foreign keys, right? The foreign key that goes to the engineer says that the engineer is the one who's assigned, but the other foreign key goes out to the job and says, oh, it is the job who's the engineer is assigned to. So I need to, both ends, right? There's 2 points of view that I need to consider. So I'm going to use the entity to retrieve both. I'll retrieve the engineer from db.engineers find, and I have to give it the ID. The ID is in the request, right? Somewhere in the request that I need to convert into an integer. Convert to integer from the request. Engineer ID. I got the engineer. What about the job? Well, the job is whatever I selected in the drop-down, right? So let's get the ID from the drop-down. Okay, so let's get the job ID from the drop-down. So the drop-down is the what we call a job chooser. There it is. We can select. You can say selected value. Right, selected value. That's going to give me the ID, right? So there it is, the selected value. Okay, as a string, which I can then convert into an integer and say ID will be convert to integer job ID. And we can now use that as to retrieve the job, right? So we can say the job will be db.jobs.find by ID. Okay, now I have both the engineer and the job. And I need to now say, hey, engineer, you know those jobs you know about that you are assigned to? Well, I want you to add to that list this job. Okay. And hey, job, you know those engineers that are assigned to you, right? I want to add to you or to that list this engineer. Right, so now they know about each other, right? Well, I need to save, right? So db.save changes. Okay. Now they know about each other. Let's refresh this. So we have a button here. We should have a button now here. Okay, assign. So the engineer is assigned to 1, 2, 3. Let's assign the engineer to job 4. Oh yeah, we need to populate, right? We need to populate this list again, right? So we need to say job list dot data source is the engineer dot jobs to list, and job list dot data bind. Okay, let's try it again. Oh no, I didn't add it. I did. I just refreshed. If it really had added it, right, it would be refreshed. Oh, I see. Okay, notice what's happened. Did you see I selected J7 and I do assign? Notice that it goes back to J1, right? I think what's happening is that the page load executes first. It re-updates the list, right? And we kind of lose the fact that a particular element was selected. So what we're going to do is, here's where that list is initially populated, right? From here. So this list should be populated only once, right? Meaning I'm going to populate it only once, the very first time I navigate to this page, and then never again, right? It is going to be the state of the page who's going to maintain, right? Whether I typed something in or whether I selected something. Remember that ASPX extends HTML by adding statefulness, right? Right. Whenever you submit a form in plain old HTML, you lose the state, right? The forms don't remember what you had typed in any of the fields, right? But when you do use ASPX text box, even though it's implemented as an input field, right, the framework maintains the state, right, of what you type, what you selected, also for dropdowns, that too. Okay, it maintains the state for that. So what we're going to do here is that, if is post back, meaning if it's not a post back, meaning it's the very first time we come in here, if it's the very, very first time that we're coming here, populate this, populate. Later on, don't populate it ever again, right? Just use the framework to maintain the state, right? Let's try this again. So let's say J8. Okay, there it is. So it's being added, right? If we go and look at the database, and we take a look at the, if we take a look at the tables, we'll notice that the job assignment, there it is. For engineer 1, we have jobs 1, 2, 3, 8 now. See that? Your question? What's happening is that this list, right, was being thrown away and recreated brand new every time, right? So it was lost, the fact that a particular item had been selected, right? So when it got to here, right, this value, I didn't have an ID for this, right? It was lost, that the fact that any particular item was selected. Okay, so now notice that I selected J8, I refreshed, notice that it remembers that I selected J8. See that? It's because it's using the same mechanism we saw earlier with text boxes, that whatever you type, when you submit, it remembers what you typed, right? Because it maintains its state using JavaScript and using all sorts of encoding, right, to remember the state of the page. Same thing here with a drop-down, right? If I select anything from the drop-down, it will remember what was selected, right? What we were doing is that, on page load, we were just throwing away the list and recreating it brand new, losing any of the statefulness, right, of the entity, of the framework, right? If we select J6 and assign, There it is, and we can see that the data. Notice that we had, engineer 1 was assigned to 1, 2, 3, 8. If we refresh, we'll notice that now they're assigned to also 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 6, and 8, right? So it's working. If we navigate to a job, right? Let's now navigate to a job, right? And from the point of view of the job, we should be able to see all the engineers that are assigned to me, right? So let's do that. Let's go to the details of the engineer, and as we iterate over all the engineers, as we iterate over all the jobs, these are all the jobs, right? And these are all the jobs. We're going to add here a TD, a href that navigates to job details.aspx and provide the job ID from the evaluation of the ID field of the current instance that we're iterating over, right? The class will be button success details. We have details, there it is. So now if I navigate to details 1, right? If you remember, there were 3, I believe there were 3 engineers, or maybe 2, that were assigned to this job, right? Let me see. So let's create the page job details. Job details. Job details. Add, and this will be. We'll put. We'll add the style sheet and the container. Okay. Where's the magical button? We'll put here H1, the label, the name of the job, right? The name of the job we're going to put here. So ASP : label ID job name, run at server. Okay. And what we'd like to be able to do is also list engineers. Yeah, I guess in the details, we should also say here jobs, right? So H2, jobs. Jobs is engineer type is assigned to. And whereas over here, engineers assigned to this job, right? So over here would be, again, would be table, class table, table striped. And here we would have T-head. In T-head, we would like to be able to list all the engineers, right? Because I'm going to show all the engineers that are associated to this job, but I would like to be able to assign other engineers, right? It'd be very similar to what we had on the other side. We'll do that last. First, let's do the body. So this is T body, and we'll use a repeater to iterate over all the engineers, right? Engineers list. Server. And this is item. And this is table row, table data, and the evaluation of the name of the engineer. Oops. Okay. We just have to populate from the code behind. We have to populate that list, right? So to do that, we can notice that we have the job ID. Okay, engineers. Notice that I don't have an engineer. I'm sorry, I don't have the name of a job, so it's showing empty. Right? I don't have the list either. Right? So let's go fetch all those things. Right? But we do have the job ID. So first, let's fetch the job for that job ID. In the code behind, we'll say that we'll get a hold of the job ID. We'll say using job entities db equal job entities, and we'll grab the job from the ID db.jobs.find. We'll convert from 32 from the request from a field called job ID. Yes. Now we have the job. We can feed the label. Oh, new. We can feed the label. I thought it's called job name dot text is equal to job dot name, and we'll feed the also the repeater for all engineers, right? So engineer list will be job dot engineers dot to list, and data bind. Oh wait, no, data bind. Sorry, this is data source, right? Data source. There we go. There we go. So we have the job one. We have only one engineer associated, but we can add more engineers. Right? We can add a drop down here. ASP drop down ID engineer. Oh, lists. No, can't have the same ID. Engineer chooser. How's that? Engineer chooser. Run at server. Right. So we could get a hold of all the engineers. Right. We could say engineer chooser dot data source is the db dot engineers dot to list, and then engineer chooser dot data bind. Right. And right now it's just instances of the object. We really want to choose the name as the text, right? So engineer chooser dot data text field will be the name, and the value data value field will be the ID. Right? You can choose the various engineers. And we can make this look a little prettier. CSS form control. And then put an assign button at the end, td ASP button. Button with ID, assign button. With button success, with the text sign, and with the on click that will generate a new event handler, which is this one. And again, we're gonna have to do the same thing, right? We're gonna find the job and the engineer, assign them to each other, right? And save the changes, and re-update. Right, we update the list of engineers assigned to this job. Right, so we can say using job entities db job entities. We're gonna get the engineer. I think we have that somewhere, don't we? Oh no, we don't have the engineer. We're gonna grab the engineer from where? From the drop down, right? Okay. So let's see, how can we get the engineer? It will be db dot engineers dot find, and we need the ID. The ID is going to come from the engineer chooser Oh no, we're gonna have to convert that into an integer, right? So it's gonna be convert dot to in 32 engineer chooser dot selected value. Yep, I think so, right? Now we have the engineer. Now we need the job. So the job is from db.jobs.find convert to integer from the request for the job ID, right? And then we assign them to each other. The engineer, the jobs, we're going to add the job. And job engineers, we're going to add the engineer. I'm going to save changes. Oops. db.save changes. And we need to re-update the list of the engineers assigned to this job. I'm going to say engineer list will be the job.engineers.toList. And oh, this is data source, right? And this is data bind. Yes, I think so, right? Yeah. What happened to my button? Is my button? What happened? Text, ASP, run at. Okay, there it is, right? So let's assign other engineers. Let's assign E999. And that didn't work. Oh, same thing as the other time, right? We have to remember not to destroy that list, right? We have to say if it's not postback, okay, let's try it again. E8. Okay, there we go. E6. Very good. So if we go here and look at the database and look at the assignments, we'll notice that what job is this? Job 1. Let's refresh. Job 1 is assigned to engineer 1, engineer 4, engineer 6, and engineer 8. 1, 4, 6, 8. See that? Okay, so we are creating the relationships between the two. And obviously, I should be able, just like from an engineer, I can go to the details. Look at that. I can go from the list of engineers to a particular engineer, which I list all the jobs. I can go to a particular job, would list all the engineers, and then I should be able to go back to the engineer, right? So it's kind of like a circle. I can navigate from anywhere, right? Following these relationships. Okay? So let's just add that one last thing of being able to, in the job details, add here td eval ID. Well, I don't want the ID, right? I don't just want the ID. I want a link that links me back to that engineer, right? So we have a href engineer details. We already have that. What? The details. I think it's expecting engineer ID as an argument. Right, close that. As is button success, and goes through details. Right, so if I click on E4, I go back. Right, notice that I can go. Notice that E4 is assigned to job 1. That's how I got here, right? I got there from job 1, right? And if I go to E4, E4 is also assigned to job 1. You know, that's how I got here in the first place. Okay, I can assign them to other things. All right, so that kind of illustrates, right, how you could create relationships between various things, right? The many-to-many is the kind of the more powerful one that allows to associate anything with anything else. Right? That makes sense? Right. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave it here. Anyone have a question? All right.